Imagine sitting in a doctor's office, right? And you're listening to a medical professional look at you and say, we are officially out of options.
Wow. Yeah, that is heavy.
It really is. They tell you there's just no hope for a cure. And I mean, society basically conditions us from birth to view that exact moment as the ultimate tragedy.
Right, because it's the absolute end of the road.
Exactly. But what if, and this is the core of what we're looking at today, what if a radically different philosophy argued that hearing those words, there is no hope, is actually a liberating mechanism?
Which completely upends our standard operating procedure. Yeah, like dealing with a crisis.
It totally does.
Yeah.
Because what if hitting a complete dead end in the physical world is the very thing that could finally set you free from suffering?
I mean, we are just so accustomed to fighting, right? To exploring every possible treatment out there.
Yeah, we want to fix it.
Exactly. So the idea of just surrendering the physical fight sounds almost irresponsible to our modern ears.
Well, we are exploring that specific tension today with you on this deep dive. Our source material is this really fascinating excerpt from a 2023 video transcript.
Ah, yes. The one uploaded by the channel, AH11.11.
Right. And it features the teachings of Abraham Hicks. So our mission for this deep dive is to really pull apart the mechanics of this philosophy, right? We want to understand how it proposes we process these overwhelming, unfixable situations.
And let's be real, the situation presented in this specific transcript is incredibly heavy.
Extremely. We're basically listening in on a conversation with a woman dealing with a very grim medical diagnosis.
Yeah, the cancer's spreading.
And the doctors have effectively run out of curative options. They are at the point where they're only offering what she literally describes as toxic chemo.
Just strictly to treat her for quality of life.
Yeah. So the stakes here, I mean, they could not be higher.
No, she is facing the ultimate limitation of the physical world. And how the source responds to her predicament is really what makes this text such a profound study in psychological frameworks.
Totally. But hey, before we get into the mechanics of that response, we really need to make our perspective explicitly clear for you listening.
Yes, very important disclaimer here.
Right. The concepts we are unpacking today, like regarding health and disease and energetic vibration, these are the viewpoints of this specific source material alone.
Absolutely. We are not endorsing these views as medical advice at all.
Not at all. Nor are we presenting them as, objective scientific truth.
Right. Our job is just to map the architecture of this very specific belief system.
Yeah, we want to understand its internal logic, like how does it supposedly operate, and see what psychological insights we can extract about human resilience.
Because we are looking at the structural load that this philosophy is meant to carry when a person is just under unimaginable stress.
Yeah, it requires suspending our conventional medical paradigms just long enough to understand this entirely different vocabulary the source is using.
Exactly, to diagnose the real problem.
So what does this all mean? Like, when we get terrible news, our biological instinct is usually to grab the steering wheel and swerve, right?
Yeah, white-knuckling it.
We want to take action, fix the problem, control the vehicle, call another doctor, schedule another test.
Do something.
Right. But what if the source is essentially telling us to completely ignore the steering wheel, stop looking at the road entirely, and only look at the fuel gauge on the dashboard?
That is a great way to put it. The entire foundation of the text really rests on this profound, basically non-negotiable distinction between two separate tracks of human experience.
Okay, let's get into those.
They label them the action journey and the emotional journey.
The action journey.
Yeah, so the action journey encompasses everything happening in the tangible three-dimensional world.
So in the context of this transcript, that's like the doctor's appointments.
Right, the doctor's appointments, the chemotherapy infusions, the physical pain, the logistical realities of a failing body. It is the steering wheel you just mentioned.
It's everything you can touch or schedule or measure on a chart.
Exactly. And then you have the emotional journey, which is your internal vibrational state. It is the fuel gauge.
Okay.
And the core argument driving the source text is that when you are facing a massive crisis, conflating these two journeys is the primary engine of human suffering.
Wow.
Yeah. The text suggests the ultimate goal is to radically, almost ruthlessly, sever the connection between them.
And dropping that connection is precisely why the text makes that jarring claim we mentioned earlier, that it is actually beneficial when a situation is deemed terminal.
Right, which sounds so counterintuitive.
It really does. But according to the source, as long as the doctors are dangling the carrot of a physical cure, the patient will remain obsessively focused on that action journey.
They will stay trapped on the hamster wheel of trying to physically fix a deeply entrenched problem.
Exactly. Monitoring every scan, every blood test, basically living and dying by those physical results.
And what's fascinating here is how the philosophy reframes a medical dead end. Well, when the doctors finally say, we have nothing left, it removes the temptation to keep fighting on the physical plane.
Oh, I see.
It forces the person to finally abandon the action journey, which the source claims is really the only thing that ever worked anyway.
Right.
The dead end forces the patient inward. It leaves them with absolutely nothing but the emotional journey.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because on a visceral human level, that is a staggering concept to accept.
Oh, incredibly difficult.
If I are the one sitting in that room hearing my condition is terminal, it seems neurologically impossible to just separate my internal emotional state from those catastrophic facts.
Yeah, because your emotions feel entirely tied to the facts.
Right. My emotions are a direct reaction to the fact that I am dying. Isn't the emotional journey entirely dependent on the action journey here? Like, how does one actually sever that cord in practice?
Well, the text does not shy away from how incredibly difficult that separation is. I mean, the woman in the transcript openly admits she struggles with it constantly.
Yeah, she was very honest about that.
She says she can maintain her internal focus maybe 70% of the time, but the other 30%. The sheer gravity of her physical reality just derails her.
Especially the reactions of her family she mentioned. That really seemed to pull her back in.
Exactly. But the directive from the source remains uncompromising.
What do they tell her?
They tell her that whatever the doctors are doing to keep her physical body comfortable, that's fine. Let them do it.
Okay.
But her only real task is to render the opinions, prognosis, and reactions of everyone else completely irrelevant to her internal state.
Like, irrelevant to the point of complete isolation if necessary.
Yeah.
Because the source advises her to just leave everyone else out of her emotional processing, right? So she can concentrate purely on shifting her internal vibration up the emotional scale.
Right, from fear to maybe slightly less fear.
Or just for frustration.
Yeah, ignoring the physical reality completely. Yeah. Just doing it entirely independently of what the tumor is doing. The separation requires adopting a somewhat radical selfishness, honestly. You stop managing the action journey of how your spouse is coping or what the neighbor thinks.
You just retreat entirely into your own mind.
Yes, the sovereignty of your own mind.
But severing that cord introduces a massive psychological trap, which the transcript highlights brilliantly.
Oh, the trap is so easy to fall into.
Right. If you accept that the physical action journey is a dead end, and you realize the emotional journey is the only tool you have left, your primal survival instinct just hijacks the process.
You naturally try to weaponize your emotions.
Exactly. You think, okay, if my mindset is the only thing that can save me, I'm going to positive think my way out of this cancer.
And the text identifies this as the single most common failure point in applying their philosophy.
Yeah, they call it out directly.
The source specifically quotes the internal monologue of a person falling into this trap. They say, I'll do the surgery, I'll do chemotherapy, I'll do Abraham's stupid process, whatever it takes to beat this cancer.
Man, the desperation in that statement is just palpable.
It really is.
Yeah.
They are treating the emotional work not as a journey of actual relief, but as just another miserable, exhausting therapy they have to endure.
Just to force a physical outcome. It's essentially conditional emotion.
Right.
They're only willing to feel good if it results in a clean scan. They're basically negotiating with their own disease.
And from the perspective of vibrational mechanics, as defined by the source, that conditional approach completely short-circuits the process.
Because you're still focused on the problem.
Exactly. By doing an emotional process purely to fix the thing you do not want, your primary focus remains locked on the existence of the cancer.
Wow. Yeah.
You are vibrating at the exact frequency of the problem you're desperately trying to escape. So the source is adamant you cannot take the emotional journey in order to cure the cancer.
It's like trying to fall asleep.
Oh, it's a perfect analogy.
Right. Like if you try to force yourself to sleep because you have a huge presentation tomorrow morning, you desperately need to be rested.
And you just lie there staring at the ceiling.
Demanding that your brain shut down. But the anxiety of needing the sleep is the exact mechanism keeping your nervous system wired and awake.
Yes.
You have to completely let go of the presentation to actually fall asleep. You have to rest in the present moment purely for the sake of resting.
And just like sleep, anxiety floods the body with adrenaline. Doing emotional work out of a desperate need to cure an illness floods the system with the vibration of desperation.
It's totally counterproductive.
Exactly. The source instructs the woman that the emotional journey must be undertaken for one incredibly narrow purpose.
Which is just to feel a little bit better.
Yes, to feel a microscopic fraction of a percent better right now in this exact moment, completely apart from the cancer.
That's fascinating. There is a paradoxical relief in that instruction, honestly. It takes the monumental pressure off the patient.
You don't have to carry the burden of healing your entire cellular structure right now.
No. You just have to find a single thought that feels slightly less agonizing than the one you had 5 minutes ago. But that intense focus on the micro-movements of emotion brings up a really crucial question about the source's underlying theory of disease.
Okay, what's that?
Well, if the goal is just momentary relief, why is the text so hyper-focused on the role of negative emotions? Like, why do they position fear as the central engine of the physical ailment?
To understand that, we have to look at how the source defines the physical mechanics of fear itself.
Okay.
They make this bold assertion that disease literally moves on the current or the vibration of fear.
Okay, so fear isn't just a reaction.
No, in this framework, fear isn't just an emotional reaction to the cancer. Fear is the energetic fuel that allows the cancer to metabolize and spread.
They even go so far as to claim that receiving a medical diagnosis often accelerates the disease.
Yes, making it more rampant.
Not because the cells suddenly mutated on their own, but because hearing the doctor say, you have cancer, triggers such an overwhelming systemic flood of fear.
And that terror supposedly creates an environment in the body where the disease can just thrive uncontrollably. Conversely, the theory proposes that if a patient could somehow pivot from that state of intense fear to a state of hopeful optimism, the internal environment would shift drastically.
Like the disease would essentially be starved of its fuel.
Exactly. It could no longer abide in that new, higher vibration.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, quite challenging to digest.
I know exactly what quote you're going to bring
You
up.
probably do, because the source drops a line that feels like an absolute anvil. They say, nothing ever happens to me that isn't a match to a vibration I've been offering.
Yeah, that is a heavy one.
I really have to push back on the sheer weight of that statement. For a person suffering from a terminal illness, doesn't that sound incredibly heavy to hear?
It sounds like victim blaming to a lot of people.
It does. It sounds like they're being told that their normal, everyday human frustrations, their stress at work, their arguments with their spouse, directly cause their own terminal illness. That is a massive burden of guilt.
This raises an important question, and it is undoubtedly the most common friction point people have with this entire philosophy.
Yeah, I can see why.
But we need to look closely at how the source contextualizes this. The text readily acknowledges that feeling angry, getting overwhelmed, or holding on to resentment, these are entirely normal behaviors in human society.
Right. So it's not a moral feeling.
Exactly. The universe isn't punishing the person for being grumpy. The problem, mechanically speaking, is that people unconsciously settle into these low-level vibrations as their chronic baseline.
Oh, I see. So it's the unconscious accumulation of a certain frequency over decades.
Yes.
A slow drip of stress that eventually crystallizes into a physical manifestation.
Exactly. It is presented purely as a mechanical reality of cause and effect. But more importantly, the source does not leave the patient crushed under that realization.
Right, they offer a counterbalance.
A very powerful counterbalance. They explain that living through these extreme, terrifying physical circumstances automatically generates what they call a pointed, powerful rocket of desire for health.
The rocket of desire. Okay, so the logic being that you have never wanted profound, vibrant health more intensely than when you are lying in a hospital bed feeling incredibly sick.
The sheer contrast of the suffering creates a proportionally massive desire for wellness.
And within their framework, that extreme desire isn't just a wish, right? It's an active force.
It is a magnetic force. It immediately pulls in immense healing energy from the broader universe.
Wow.
The source explicitly tells the woman she has more actual healing energy moving toward the cells of her body right in that moment than the rest of the room combined.
So the solution has already been activated by her suffering. She doesn't need to beg for a cure.
The reservoir of wellness is already flowing toward her.
Okay, but wait. If that massive reservoir of healing energy is already flowing toward her, what's the catch? Why is the cancer still spreading?
The interference comes down to a concept they call resistance. Yeah, the desire summons the healing energy, but the person's own internal resistance, their fear, their fixation on the illness, their hidden doubts acts as literal energetic dam.
So the wellness is pushing toward them, but their subconscious fear blocks it.
Therefore, the only job the patient actually has is to dismantle that dam.
Yeah.
They just need to remove their own resistance.
But how does a human being practically do that? I mean, it is incredibly easy to say, oh, just drop your resistance.
Right. Much harder to do.
We are talking about a woman facing the imminent end of her physical life. How do you drop resistance to death?
Well, this brings us to what is arguably the most intense and revealing moment in the entire transcript.
Yeah, where the source dissects the practical reality of how she's actually feeling versus the performance she's putting on.
Exactly. The source aggressively calls her bluff during this exchange.
Because leading up to this moment, she had been speaking very lightly, right? Almost casually about her situation.
She uses all the right spiritual buzzwords. She talks about knowing she's going to be healed and working hard to keep her focus entirely on the positive.
Basically presenting herself as the model patient who has conquered her fear.
But the source doesn't buy the performance at all. They push her to really feel around in the dark corners of her emotions. And finally, the facade cracks.
She admits she is just putting on a brave face.
Yes. She confesses that she is exhausting herself trying to protect her family and friends from the devastation of her leaving them.
She's actively trying to compartmentalize and isolate her true feelings of absolute terror.
The primal fear of abandoning her family, the fear of running out of time, the fear that the illness is actually going to win.
And here is where the diagnostic logic of the philosophy really shines. Because the source points out a fundamental contradiction.
What's that?
If she were genuinely vibrating at the positive frequency of knowing she's going to be healed, like she claimed, the progression of the illness would have halted.
Right. The empirical fact that the illness is still aggressively spreading is all the proof needed that she is not actually in a positive vibrational state.
Exactly. Her emotional numbness and her performative brave face, those aren't high vibrations.
They are incredibly dense, profound forms of resistance.
So pretending to be positive when you're terrified is essentially like painting over a rotting load-bearing wall in your house.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to look at it.
Thanks. Like, it looks fantastic to your family when they come to visit. They see the fresh coat of paint, they admire how well everything is holding together, and they feel comforted.
But the structural wood underneath is still failing.
And a fresh coat of paint does absolutely nothing to fix the rotting wood. It just hides the damage while the house collapses. You have to admit the wall is rotting, you know. You have to rip down the drywall before you can actually start replacing the beams.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source is delivering a devastating critique of toxic positivity. The text tells the woman she needs to take a stick and poke at her true feelings. She has to agitate that protective numbness until she fully acknowledges the depth of her own terror.
Because you cannot navigate a map to a new destination if you are continuously lying to your GPS about your current starting location.
That is so true. You cannot authentically move up the emotional scale from a fabricated starting point.
If your genuine baseline is terror, you have to start at terror. You have to look at it and say, I am terrified because I am out of medical options and my time is running out.
The source actually forces her to say it out loud in the room, to feel the visceral amplification of that dread without running from it.
The philosophy demands that only from that solid bedrock of truth can she attempt to find a thought that feels even marginally less terrifying.
It requires a level of radical self-honesty that most of us spend our lives avoiding.
Oh, without a doubt.
It demands that you stop performing your bravery to comfort the people around you. You have to stop trying to manage the action journey of your family's grief and ruthlessly prioritize your own internal emotional journey.
Even if it looks messy or weak from the outside.
Especially then.
It fundamentally flips the cultural script on what it means to be strong in the face of a crisis. We are so conditioned to view strength as stoicism, right?
Never complaining, always smiling through the pain.
Keeping the brave face intact for the kids. But this perspective suggests that brand of performative strength might be the exact mechanism suffocating your life force.
True strength, according to this framework, is possessing the raw courage to admit exactly how petrified you are.
And refusing to judge yourself for feeling that way.
It is a profoundly useful mental model, completely separate from whether you personally subscribe to the specific energetic mechanics the source outlines.
Exactly. Think about the practical takeaways for you, the listener, navigating your own life this week.
The core concept of decoupling the action journey, the unchangeable facts of a situation from the emotional journey, your right to seek internal relief, is universally applicable.
You do not need to be facing a terminal cancer diagnosis for these mechanics to resonate. We all have action journeys that get completely gridlocked.
Oh, definitely.
Maybe you are entrenched in a nasty lawsuit that is dragging on for years.
Yeah.
Maybe you are stuck in a deeply toxic work environment, but you can't afford to quit right now.
Or a financial crisis with absolutely no quick fix in sight.
Right. The physical facts are immovable. The logistics are terrible.
And our default human behavior is to chain our emotional well-being directly to those immovable realities.
We bargain with ourselves. We say, I will finally allow myself to relax when the lawsuit is settled.
Or I will feel a sense of peace once my bank account hits a certain number.
Exactly. We hold our own nervous systems hostage to the unpredictable whims of the physical world.
But the source material today is advocating for a radical, almost subversive act of self-care.
Yes, it suggests that prioritizing your own emotional relief just for the intrinsic value of feeling a tiny bit better in this exact minute, not as a manipulative tool to force a worldly outcome, but simply to give your exhausted mind a break, is the only sustainable path forward.
You have to locate the steering wheel, acknowledge it is locked, and then let it go to focus on the fuel gauge.
When you realize the car is buried up to the axles in mud, you stop flooring the gas pedal and burning out the engine.
You just sit back, take a breath, and focus on the hum of the radio.
Disconnecting the journeys doesn't mean you have given up on improving your physical world.
No, it means you recognize that your internal emotional landscape is a sovereign territory. It is a space you have the absolute right to govern and soothe, entirely regardless of the chaos unfolding outside the windows.
We spend the vast majority of our lives desperately trying to control our circumstances, trying to fix that jagged white line on the metaphorical X-ray.
Believing that once we fix the external world, we will finally be granted permission to feel peace.
We view peace as the reward for solving the problem. But what if our relentless obsession with finding a solution in the physical world is the exact mechanism generating the resistance that keeps us from experiencing the peace we actually crave right now? What if the X-ray doesn't have to change one bit for you to feel better today? Something to think about. Until next time.